Hello and welcome to Running on Carbs Podcast. I am your host, Coach Val, and I would like to welcome you to episode number 45 of the podcast today. Today, the long run is calling. The long run is the calling card of the distance runner. It's the capstone run workout of the week, and many runners, they wear their weekly long run as a badge of honor. It stands as a accumulation of the athlete's months, if not years, of dedication to their sport and their fitness discipline. I too am not immune to the calling of the long run. This week, we are going to talk about the three key principles, the three key variables that I focus on and encourage my athletes to focus on to get the most out of their coveted weekly workout. Okay, so let's dive in. If you are new here, again, I am Coach Val. And every week on the podcast, I talk all things running and I talk all things plant-based nutrition as it relates to health and performance. This week, as I mentioned, we're going to dive into what my brain goes through as I talk about and think about a long run. And these are the three things that I primarily focus on during every single long run that I do. So let's jump in. First, what is a long run? What defines a long run? Because a long run can be very different depending on the runner. First of all, primarily the way I define a long run is it is simply the longest run of the week for the athlete. So if you are a newer athlete, your running distance, your long run is going to be shorter than, say, someone who's been running for several years and who does half marathons and marathons with regularity. So it really depends on the individual, as with so much when it comes to running. The rule of thumb is that it comprises probably about 33%, so let's say roughly a third of your weekly mileage. Now, this is not set in stone. This is fluid. It really depends on the athlete's training plan, what they're training for, their health, um, their overall training as it fits into their life as well. So I like to just give some very broad numbers on that. So if you come to me for a training plan, don't, come back and say, "Hey, Coach Val, this is not exactly 33%." So it may not be. It'll be dependent on the athlete. Also, it can be measured in time. So you don't have to do a distance plan. You can do a time-based plan. And so if we're going to measure a long run by time, we're probably going to, on average, it's going to be roughly an hour and a half, 90 minutes. But again, if you are a new runner, that could be a really tall order. And so we're not going to send you out the gate on a 90-minute long run when you've never run more than a mile in your life. So we're going to scale that back a little bit for the newer runner. But generally speaking, for someone who's more experienced, maybe an intermediate runner, that's a good rule of thumb. It is also important to understand the purpose of a long run. So the purpose of a long run is to train the body to use and manage its glycogen stores. And glycogen stores in the body are used for energy. And that is primarily the runner's fuel, is glycogen. And we get that from carbohydrates, which is running on carbs. That is what we do. Our bodies run on carbs, and we as runners, of course, are running on carbs. So if you ever wondered where the name of my podcast came from, now you know. It also is a way to help us improve our running economy, which is the ability to transfer and use oxygen in the body, because our long run is aerobic. So we are using oxygen. And it teaches you how to sit in and overcome discomfort, because running for an hour and a half straight is not a comfortable activity. I don't care how fit you are. Running at a long distance over a long period of time is not comfortable. It's not unenjoyable if you're doing it properly, or it can be enjoyable, but it isn't necessarily something that is always comfortable. So you are teaching your body and your mind to both mentally and physically overcome discomfort. It is called a long run, but every 3 weeks or so, the plans that I build and many plans that I'm aware of and familiar with will step back in mileage. And this is what we call a cutback week. And even during cutback weeks, there's still typically a longer run toward the end of a week. And so even though you are cutting back in your overall mileage and volume, you'll still have a long run. It just may not be as long as the previous week, I should say, or even previous 3 weeks. So every 3 weeks or so, I cut back on the mileage just to give the body a little break and a breather so that you can come back stronger, and it helps to prevent injury. It gives the body a little refresh, a little break, and then you can come back stronger the next week and pick right up and move forward in your plan. There are many ways to perform a long run. And again, this goes back to being dependent on the athlete's goals, on the purpose for the long run. You always want a purpose for any workout during the week, especially during a training plan session. So, if you are following a training plan, every run in that plan should have a purpose and an outcome and a goal. And there should be a reason for that specific workout in your plan. Um, and also, it depends on fitness. So, all these things are as per usual, it always depends, right, on the individual. But most of the long runs are going to be at what we call your conversational pace. You also may have heard me refer to it as your easy pace, although I try to be careful with that because easy is very relative and it's not easy. As I just said before, you're working at teaching your body and yourself to be in an uncomfortable place and to move forward and to move through it. So calling it an easy run pace, that's kind of relative. So we'll just go with conversational pace. And conversational pace is, you can speak in sentences if you need to. Um, and you might not want to have a full-on conversation, although you could, as far as like, long paragraphs and stories and things. But if you're with a friend, you can chat back and forth and you can actually have a conversation. It just might not be quite as unbreathy as if you were sitting across from each other drinking coffee. So you're still going to be breathing. So, breathing a little harder. But as you advance in your training and in your running, or you're training for harder races that require real pace efforts, so speed, then you can also incorporate some pacing practice within a long run. So, for example, you might have a 10-mile run and you're going to incorporate 1 mile runs or 1 mile intervals, if you will, long intervals at your race pace goal. So, if you're going to be running a marathon, you might do a couple of miles within your long 10-mile total run. You might incorporate a couple of miles within this at your goal marathon pace. And this is what we call a long run with pace effort. So it again depends on what you're training for and what you're going for, and of course your fitness level um, and your physical ability, because I would not want to include any type of pace work in a plan where the runner is a new runner, or maybe like myself has been coming off of an injury that was very serious. We want to make sure that we are incorporating pace work more uh, conservatively. So that's the right word. On the opposite spectrum of your pace work, long runs, are your social long runs. And these may include as much as like walk breaks. You could even like stop at a coffee shop, grab a cup of coffee with your running buddies, and then you just pick up on your run, for the rest of the time. Um, it could be like sightseeing. So you might be off on a beautiful run somewhere new and different. And you're really just using running as a form of exercise and relaxation with a group, and it's really just more social. Or maybe not even with a group. Maybe you are on vacation. I had a beautiful runs when I used to go up to Santa Barbara to visit my son. And I would just go on all sorts of beautiful runs in Santa Barbara just on my own, not really training for anything. I had certain distance goals in mind. So I would plan out my route for my runs, but I would just go down by the beach and just, run along the beach and watch the waves and just enjoy the environment. But if I was tired, I would take little walk breaks or take pictures or something. So those are like the opposite spectrum of your pace long runs. These are your social long runs, and they were much more relaxed. So you might have some walking breaks in there and things like that too. So, I have a very, um, big love of the long run. As a distance runner personally, I look forward to my long runs every week. And I gotta admit that when I am training for something or my distance is getting longer and longer, and then I have a cutback week, I'm a little bummed that I have to cut back my mileage because I enjoy that time that I have just to myself out and running. um, I will typically listen to an audiobook, and that's really the only time that I listen to fiction. Usually, I will listen to audiobooks that are nonfiction, or I'll listen to podcasts. Um, uh, Surprise, surprise, I'm a huge podcast listener. I don't even know how many podcasts I'm subscribed to. I couldn't tell you. I'd have to go count them, and that would take me too long. So I'm not worried about it. But a lot of podcasts. And I also love to listen to books on my Kindle. Um, so I'm a big content absorber. I love content in a lot of different ways, but I don't listen to nonfiction. It's usually, I'm sorry, I take that back. I do listen to nonfiction. I don't usually listen to fiction, with the exception of my long runs. So when I was training for my first marathon, I listened to all of the Harry Potter books, and I just listen to whatever seems interesting that has a good story. But usually I look for something that has a series because I know I'm going to finish a book fairly quickly because long runs are a couple of hours usually. So that's a long time to listen to an audiobook. And so I will look for things that have, a lot of story to it. So series are really like key for me. And if you haven't tried listening to an audiobook on your run, then I highly recommend it because it's very entertaining, and it just allows you to just go off into sort of a little fantasy world and focus on something else and a story and just enjoy the run. So that is when I do it, or when I listen to stories. And it's just a meditative time to turn off work, turn off thinking about others, because really at that moment in time, all you can think about in your brain is just focusing on what I'm going to talk about here in a moment, your three variables, and just being out in the world and enjoying the love of running. So, what are the three key variables? Even though I'm in a meditative state and listening to my wonderful audiobook and enjoying a story, there are still three things that I continue to focus on during these long runs. And these are the three things that I focus on, these three variables, every single long run. Because they are so important. And now they've just become automatic. It's just part of what I do when I'm on a long run. But they might be new to you. And so these are the three variables. The first one, number one, is distance. And it might seem obvious, but not necessarily, because, like we said earlier, um, you might be out on a social run where distance isn't something you're really thinking about. But distance is very important. So, distance is number one, and it's distance per your plan, whatever that might be, whether it's an off season plan or whether it's an actual race training plan. Distance is a key element that you need to be focused on and thinking about. This can also again be time. So if you are following a time-based plan, then swap distance for time. And unless it's a social run, distance and time on feet really matter. That's going to be very key to your training effort and your success or, unsuccessful training for your race outcome. And also, you don't want to overdo your distance. Believe it or not, yes, you can overdo your distance. Here's an example. You're out on a social run, you're feeling really good, you're maybe running with someone who's a little more advanced than you. So they're using a little less effort and able to go a little farther than you are. But you are having such a great time and you are enjoying the company, you're enjoying the environment, and you want to keep running. So you keep going. Then, when you're done with your run and you're back, and probably the next day, because that's usually when it kicks in, now you start to feel it. So now you start to feel, the aches and pains, the niggles. You could potentially end up with an actual injury from a long run like that. If you truly overdo it, you might flare up some old injury. You can get an overuse injury. It may or may not be very serious or long lasting, but it certainly could impact your training for the rest of the week, maybe 2 weeks. So really be cautious when you're feeling good. Know your limits. Think of that 33 or a third percent of your weekly mileage. Think of that rule a little bit just to gauge and give you an idea ahead of time if you are overdoing it, especially if you are not following a training plan that's already been structured with your distances. So if you are just on an off season and you're just running for fitness and fun at the time, still pay attention to your mileage because you don't want to end up with any type of injury that may prolong you getting back into the game when you're ready to start racing again. So, plus, nobody wants an injury. Injuries, by the way, are really expensive, not to mention, inconvenient and painful. But, if you end up having to go to physical therapy or anything like that, or increase your self-care appointments, massage, etc., those are going to get expensive. So, injuries are not inexpensive. They're not cheap. So, if anything else, save your pocketbook. If you are training for a race, this could be a very specific distance or time, that you are going to be training for. So follow your training plan. Trust your plan. Your coach or, whoever has provided this plan for you has thought it through, has calculated the miles based on your goals and, what you're training for. And so you need to trust the process. There is a method to the madness, so to speak. I know when I create plans, I'm very meticulous about that and laying out the mileage and calculating that and making sure it's not too much, not too little, and that you're progressing over time. So distance is number one. All right. Number two variable. Number two variable is heart rate. As compared to RPE, which is rate of perceived exertion. So when I measure heart rate, and I do run by heart rate, um, I am looking for my long runs and my athletes' long runs to be between an RPE of like 3 to 4. And this is like breathing more rapidly than you would be if you were fast walking. Um, but you can still speak in sentences, you can still have that conversation. Like I said, just not the same kind of conversation as you would if you were sitting across from each other at a table drinking coffee. Uh, but you are still able to communicate and have that conversation without, grunting and huffing and puffing and, breathing really heavily. You might do that for a few moments if you hit a hill, but then it should come back down. So it will be higher for long runs though with pace work. So remember that if you are doing pace work in your long run, it's not going to be a conversational pace. It's going to be your pace work. So you may not be able to have that conversation while you're doing your pace work, miles at least within that long run. I use heart rate as a measurable variable because it's consistent and it can be tracked objectively. So I know when my fitness is improving, then I can see over time that heart rate either come down or I can see my effort go up and the heart rate maintain. So, for example, you can see it really clearly when you run a same path all the time. And if you are measuring your heart rate and you're paying attention to your perceived exertion, and there's an incline maybe on this pathway that when you first started running it would just wind you, your heart rate would go way up and you'd get to the top and you're like, whew, glad that's done. But your heart rate had to recover. So you can see that, you can measure it. And, watches and heart rate straps, some are better than others. But, there's a lot of like controversy, I guess you can call it, about these watches, about these sports watches, and saying that, oh, they don't measure heart rate exactly. I don't know that that necessarily matters if you're not at the elite level. What you're looking for is that consistency. So, as long as your watch is measuring at a consistent level, it's not so much about the number. You want it within an actual range that you are aiming for. So if you're looking for what they call zone 2, which is conversational pace, um, there's going to be a range, a heart rate range that you're aiming for. If you bump up a little bit over it at times because of effort, or if you're on a little incline or something like that, that's not the end of the world. You're not like killing your whole run because of it. You are a recreational runner if you are listening to this podcast, and a little bit outside of your, you know, goal zone for your heart rate is not going to ruin your run. Where you're going to have trouble and run into trouble with heart rate is when you are consistently overshooting and you are consistently running way higher than your easy pace heart rate. And you should know this because you're winded, number one, and you're tired at the end of your run. You do not feel invigorated or energized. You feel depleted and wiped out. Now, I admit long runs can do that to you in general, especially if you are training for a new distance. So, if this is your first marathon, or even if it's your fifth marathon, when your mileage starts to get way up there in those double digits there, you're going to feel fatigued. But that's part of the process. That's part of the training. When I'm talking about finishing a run feeling depleted and exhausted, I mean like your heart is jumping out of your chest, you're breathing really heavily, like you just, sprinted or something. Um, that's too much for a long run. I don't think even with pace work, you should ever have that feeling at the end of a long run. I think in that point, you're just running too fast, too hard. Um, but, let me get back to where I was. So you wanna look at I digress. So you wanna watch for spikes. So that's primarily what we're looking for with our heart rate, goals here. So you're looking for spikes. If you are on a hilly or a rolling path, you might have some times when it's gonna go up, and then it's gonna come back down as you level off. But you want to watch your heart rate over time on that same spot. So over time, as you take that hill, maybe in the beginning, your heart rate really spikes. And then as you consistently run that path over the weeks and months, you'll start to see from your overall fitness, from all of the running that you're doing, that's kinda like a gauge. When you hit that hill, what is your heart rate doing on that hill that used to spike it? Is it still spiking it, or has it leveled off a bit? Has your heart rate come down and then it comes down from its spike previously? And then when you get to the top of the hill, how quickly do you recover? So how quickly does your heart rate drop back down to your conversational pace heart rate zone? So those are the things that you're watching. Those are the things that you're looking for. So you're looking for patterns and then you're looking for consistency. Also, you can't talk about heart rate without talking about weather and terrain because those have a real big impact on your heart rate. Again, hills have a big impact, but also technical terrain. So if you like to run on dirt paths or trails, your heart rate is going to do different things than it would if you were just on a road. So consider terrain. And then, of course, heat and humidity, those just wreak absolute havoc on your heart rate. You may not even think that you're quite as tired as your body says you are. So, really pay attention to that when there's heat, especially if there's heat and humidity. But either one can also affect you. I know here in, where I live by the coast, even mornings can be difficult. It might be cold and chilly in the morning, but a lot of times because I'm so close to the ocean, there's a lot of humidity in the air. And that can actually cause difficulty with my runs because it's so wet. And, breathing in deeply on those runs in the wet air, that can also cause you to have, higher heart rate, more difficulty. So you got to use that RPE gauge, that rate of perceived exertion, along with the heart rate. Because with the rate of perceived exertion and the heart rate, the two combined, that really tells you if you're staying in the proper effort zone. So if I'm running in let's say a humid hot day, um, my heart rate might be pretty high, but I want to check in with my RPE, my rate of perceived exertion, to see if I'm overshooting or if I'm undershooting. So the two combined really matter. The way I use it on my everyday long runs without weather, being a big factor, on my normal long runs, I will check my heart rate on a regular basis just to ensure that I'm in my proper heart rate zone that I'm aiming for. But sometimes my heart rate shows it's lower, but I'm feeling tired. And that could be from so many different variables. It could just be that I didn't get enough sleep that night and I might be tired. Maybe I had a stressful week and the stress is carrying over into my weekend or my long run. Maybe I'm having a stressful day that day. And all those things can really impact rate of perceived exertion and heart rate. So we need to consider the two variables together as we're calculating that. Okay, number three, the third variable that I focus on every long run is form. Form, form, form. It's so key. And especially as you fatigue. So long runs are long. So you might feel really good at the start of a long run. Your first 20, 30 minutes, you might be feeling like dynamite, like, oh, this is great. I feel awesome. This is going to be such a great run. I'm going to feel great. And, you get past your first couple miles and you start to fatigue a little bit. And depending on how far you're going, I mean, if you're doing a double digit long run and you're only on mile 5, you got a ways to go. So, you have to check in on your form as you go. And as you start to fatigue, you might start to lose your form. So it's even more important to just check back in with the body. So every so often, every mile or so, sometimes more often as your miles really are up higher, you might check in every half mile or so. But you do a body scan, just a mental body scan, and you're asking yourself, okay, where are my shoulders? Are my shoulders up by my ears or are they relaxed? And do a couple shoulder rolls, just kind of check in. Okay, how am I doing here? Are my shoulders down? Okay, good. Um, and then you want to check your arm swing. Arm swing is one of those things. Yeah, so many things can be impacted by your arm swing. Um, but you want to check and see, okay, do I have a good, nice right angle at my elbow? Or are my arms, swinging across my body? Am I clenching my fists? Or do I have nice loose fists? Another thing I do, and I don't know, tell me if you do the same thing. Everyone's got their little thing, right? But what I notice is that I'm pretty good about keeping a loose fist when I run. But as I get fatigued and tired, I actually don't clench my fist. What I do is I stretch my hand out. So my fingers go out and they get these like weird contorted uh, angles. Like I can see them in race photos sometimes. I'm like, what am I doing with my hands? So they get these weird, like, I don't know, outstretched hand position, and that's actually tension. So that's actually me holding my tension in my hands. It's almost like I'm trying to, run with my hands for energy. But that means I'm tense. That means that I'm holding too much stress and energy in my upper body rather than relaxed running. So every once in a while, shake out your hands. When I'm running, sometimes like to relax my shoulders, my hands, especially if I'm starting to notice that holding my position weird or something, is I will just put my arm straight over my head as I'm running and shake my hands, just like I shake them out. And it really helps to just kind of release the energy in your entire upper body. And I just run that way for a few seconds, do some arm shakes, and then I kind of drop them down by my side, do some more arm shakes, shake out my hands, just to relax everything in the upper body. And so that helps to reset. So the purpose of that is to release that tension and to reset your form. So then once you do that, you can put your arms back in your proper angle with good, nice, even, relaxed arm swing and that loose fist instead of the, weird stretched out hands or clenched fists, depending on how you hold your tension. The next thing I focus on is foot placement and where my foot is landing on the ground on each footfall. So I'm looking for a nice mid-foot strike on the ground with my foot landing just ever so slightly out in front of me so that I'm not landing on my heel, but I'm landing nice mid-foot, maybe even slightly forefoot, depends on, again, terrain, pace, things like that. But on my easy runs, typically it's a nice midfoot strike. And that's what I'm focused on. And I'm also focused on stride length. So again, not totally outstretched, but I want to make sure that I have good hip extension. This is something that I continuously work on because I tend to have a shorter hip extension in the rear, like at the end of the gait cycle. And it's not too uncommon. I think a lot of people have this issue. It comes from, having weak glutes, weak um, extensors and things like that. So it's an area that I continue to work on with my strength training and auxiliary exercises that I do for strengthening. And it's not uncommon. It's very common for runners to have those weaknesses and imbalances. And it's just something that you have to continuously work on. But bringing mindfulness to these areas of weakness helps to focus on them and to activate those muscles while you're running. So, again, as you're fatiguing, bringing a mental focus to those areas that are fatigued, that may not be really working to their full proper capacity, bringing a mental focus to that area of your body as you're running and really helping to accentuate that and to focus on it helps it activate, helps it work properly. So that's why we're doing this body scan, because as we fatigue, we start to get lazy, we start to use muscles that maybe shouldn't be used. We should be using those big running muscles, not those little tiny support muscles. So we want to bring our mind to them and activate them. Another area that I focus on, that I encourage everyone to focus on, is core activation. And again, this is very nuanced. That's a good word for it. Um, I recommend like a slight forward lean, very slight, and hips tucked in ever so slightly forward to engage the core. So the idea is when you are running, you want to have an activated core, which is like your abs and your hip flexors. You want this whole center area from the chest to the upper hip to be active and to give you support for your running. If you do this properly and you focus on activating the core muscles while you run, you are going to have less back pain. Because again, as we fatigue, if your muscles are not active and strong on the front of your body, then you're going to be using the back of your body. And that might be your low back. And that is not an area that you want to run with. Those are not running muscles. Those are your, stability like upright muscles, not your running muscles. So you want to focus on having your core nice and strong and activated while you're running. The last thing that I focus on when it comes to form is cadence. And cadence is the number of footfalls per minute. And I aim for a nice quick turnover, which is like a nice quick light turnover as much as possible. Um, Personally, I aim based on my height and all of that and my pace and everything. I aim for on my easy runs about 172 steps per minute on my long runs. So that would be a cadence of 172. Sometimes it's a little faster, not usually much slower. 172 is about my bottom, but I've trained myself over the years to have that kind of foot turnover and to have that stride length. So your cadence might be different. It also depends on how tall you are and a number of other things. There isn't a one size fits all when it comes to cadence, even though if you've been around much and hearing stories and articles and people talk, they're like, oh, you got to aim for the 180 cadence. That study was done, whether they came up with that 180 number, was done on elite athletes. So I don't know. I'm not an elite athlete. So I'm not aiming for the 180, but I am aiming for a comfortable cadence that is quick and light, because that has been shown to help with not heel striking. So it helps to avoid a heel strike and keep it more your foot under your body with a quick turnover. So the idea is to reduce the potential for injury by doing this, by not overstriding, heel striking, etc. Now we can go into all sorts of information and back and forth about heel strike, whether it's good, bad, all of that. Does it cause more injuries? Doesn't it? I don't know for sure. I think if you're not getting injured, it may be fine for you. But I think it also causes quite a lot of injury, or has been shown to cause a lot of issues in runners. So, aim for that midfoot, but be careful with changing your stride overnight or changing your cadence overnight. It's something that you need to work toward. So it's not something that you just up and change because that could cause injury. So we want to avoid injury in all ways. So, what don't I focus on? So, there's something I don't focus on, and that is how fast I'm running. I don't focus on that. As a matter of fact, the slower the better when it comes to a long run. So, I don't focus on did I beat my long run time from last week versus this week? Did I run it faster than my last race of the same distance? That's not my focus. I really don't care how fast or slow I'm running my long runs. As a matter of fact, the only thing I can do wrong when it comes to pacing on a long run is run it too fast because then I'm not getting those biomechanical benefits that I'm aiming for running 10, 12 miles. So, I mean, if I'm going to run that kind of distance and commit that amount of time, I really want to get out of it what I'm aiming for. So, I mean, that's like I don't know, it's like working for free, right? You really wanna get something back for all of your time and effort and energy. So, don't run your long runs too fast unless it's part of your structured training plan. You're working on those slow twitch muscles and activating those muscles. You're not working on sprinting, you're not working on those fast twitch muscles and all of that. You are working on the endurance energy and the biomechanical systems that support that. Again, it just fully defeats the purpose of a long run for all the biological, reasons that you're doing it if you go too fast. So you're not going to get those same benefits. Um, Again, caveat unless you are training specifically for a pace goal, then you may have some of those miles in there. Um, In that case, you will likely have multiple types of long runs in your training plan. So you probably won't have, I hope not at least, you're not going to have every single long run in your training plan with pace work because that's going to overdo it. So you might have one run, maybe two in a month that has pace work, and then the other long runs will be conversational pace, work on this energy system that we're talking about. So, um, always run to your training plan. All right. So, in summary, focus on distance or time, number one. Number two, heart rate as compared to RPE, and form, especially as you fatigue. So, those are my three primary variables that I focus on every long run that I hope you will take away from today's episode and that you will focus on as well. Because long runs can be the most enjoyable run of your entire week. So, don't overthink it. You have three simple things to kind of focus on, and they're not even things that you focus on the entire time. You're not trying to change anything. These are just the variables that you are focusing on for your overall long run. And so now you just have those three little variables to think about on your next long run. And if you focus on these, you can just relax, enjoy that audiobook. By the way, send me any recommendations that you have for great audiobook series because right now I'm listening to Percy Jackson. So I went from Harry Potter to Percy Jackson. You can see a theme. But I kind of liked that just easy, don't have to think kind of, enjoyable story to listen to. So I'm listening to the books. I've never heard these books before or read them. I think they probably came out, when I was an adult. So anyway, I enjoyed the movie. So I'm listening to the book. So, but I'm always looking for a new series. So if you have something, really light and easy along those lines, let me know. I'm on Instagram. So go to running.on.carbs on Instagram and share with me. Um, So, okay. So, anyway, if you want help, if you need some help with any of this, reach out. If you need some guidance, please reach out to me. There's a link in the show notes on every episode that you can get on my um, calendar and set up a call. We'll talk for 20 minutes and just kind of strategize about what it is that you're doing that you need help with. Any questions that you have, we'll just do a little strategy call, see, some of the areas that you might want some help in. Or if you just kind of have a question about how does coaching work, then reach out, ask me. Happy to share, no obligation. But it might be nice to get a couple answers to your questions. So happy to do that. And then don't forget that my running journal is available on Amazon.com. It is a paper, actual book running journal. Incorporate your watch data and put it into your journal. Have a nice paper tracking system for that. Lots of room to take actual notes about your runs and to maybe take notes on what we've talked about today. My cadence was this. I felt, a challenge, or the route that I took had lots of hills. This is what my heart rate did, all sorts of things. So you have plenty of room to take your notes for your training in that book. And it covers 180 runs. So that could be like 6 months of runs for you if you're running, all the time. But check that out. It's on Amazon. Link, of course, is in the show notes. I have this thing called a link tree. If you're not familiar with it, the link to just the link tree is in the show notes. But if you go to that one link, it'll bring up a grid, I don't know, a little like website that has links to everything that I talk about on the episode and that I don't talk about. So, there's other books on there that I've written, that I've developed, that are available, links to my social and all those other things. So you could just go to one place and find everything there. Plus, all of the free downloads that I've offered over this last year, all those links are also there. So if you can't remember what episode I talked about it on or something like that, but you want like the free weekly meal planner or something, go to the link tree and all of those links are there. And so you can find any older links that I've talked about previously that I don't have time to talk about every week. You can find everything there. And then lastly, if I could make a plea, if you are enjoying the episodes, I would be ever so grateful if you would leave a rating and review for the podcast, especially a 5-star, please, to let others know that you've enjoyed the podcast and what you've gotten out of it and who might enjoy it. Um, so that we can share the love and get the podcast out to more people. Everything's about algorithms these days. I never used to know what an algorithm was. Now it's like an everyday language. Like, why do we know this word? But it's an important word because so much of what we do is online and out there on the internet. And there are algorithms that read that stuff. So when you leave ratings and reviews and they're positive, then it helps others to find the show and I can help more people. So, and they can join our tribe. So please leave a rating and review if you're finding this information helpful. It would be really helpful to me and I would be very appreciated. And I read all of them. So I really appreciate that. Thank you. All right. So that's it for our show today. I hope you enjoyed it and I hope you will join me again next week for next week's episode. And until next time, run your best life on carbs. I'm Coach Val and I will see you next time. Have a great week.